Hey guys, I've got a dilemma, and it's one of those situations where you just sort of wish that things were like a tick better than they are. For about the past 4 years, I've been using two different camera bodies for the most part with all the videos I've made. One of them is the Canon M50, which is the one you're looking at right now, and the second is the Canon 70D, which I've got here in my hands. And I've also been using about 4 different lenses that I just interchange a lot with. One is the Canon 15 to 45 millimeter, the Sigma 24 to 70, the Canon 50 millimeter, and the Canon 18 to 135 millimeter. Now there's things I like about both of these cameras and all 4 of these lenses, but there's also a few things that I don't like, and that's really where the dilemma comes in is it worth me upgrading my camera body, or is it worth me upgrading my lenses? I'm kind of in a toss-up right now, and I could use some help. To explain, let me first go over the camera bodies and just mention a few things that stand out to me for them. Now, in my opinion, the Canon M50 and the Canon 70D are almost identical, especially when you consider the images they produce. It's a solid 1080p across the board, looks fine, and I'm pretty happy with it for the most part. The Canon M50 also can shoot 1080p up to 60 frames per second, which is one thing the Canon 70D can't do. Both these cameras take great raw photos. I'm really happy with that. The Canon M50 actually has an EFM mount, but if you get a Viltrox speed booster and adapt the EF lenses to the EFM mount, you can essentially get twice as many focal ranges with the amount of lenses that you have. So if you have 2 lenses, pair that with the speed booster, and you can really get like 2 additional focal lengths, which is really neat. One other thing that I really like about these 2 cameras is the menu system and the controls. I can really jump between both of these camera bodies almost without much adjustment, and yeah, just the menu system from one camera to the other translates really well, and it makes it easy to jump between them. Now, as far as cons with these 2 cameras, I already mentioned about the 1080p at 60 frames per second with the Canon M50. The Canon 70D can only do 720p, which is kind of outdated, I feel like, at this point. A lot of things are heading in the 4K direction or are already there. You just walk into any store and you see TVs that are like super high resolution, and yeah, 720p is kind of out the window at this point in my book. 1080p is, you can get by with it, and 4K is just where things are heading. So I'd like to be shooting more 4K, and neither of these cameras really can. The Canon M50 can shoot 4K at 24 frames per second, and it's pretty good. The only problem is there's a rolling shutter with the Canon M50, which makes it that if you are panning your camera at all, if you go slowly enough, it's not a problem, but if you pan fast, you get this jello-y effect because of the rolling shutter, and so it doesn't really make sense to use that unless you are locked off on a tripod. That's really the only time I would consider shooting 4K is no movement in the camera, just a straight locked off shot. Also, the Canon M50 has pretty bad battery life. I always have like 4 extra batteries with me at all times when I'm using it. And especially when the weather gets colder, like it's fall now, if I would try to do anything outside, the colder the air is, the faster the battery dies, unfortunately. So that's just sort of a downside to this camera. Also, neither of these cameras are that great in low light situations. Once you bump the ISO above like 1600, you just start getting a lot of noise in your image, and yeah, your images just really crumble, fall apart, and that's no good. Nobody wants that. I don't want that. You don't want that. So overall, I'm happy with both of these cameras. They are great starter cameras. I've loved using the Canon M50. That one's my personal one, so I've used that for all of my vlogs and I don't know, a few short films that I made in the past on my channel. But I'm happy with both these cameras. There's just a few things that I wish they could get me to the next level as far as image quality goes. But now let's talk about some of the lenses that I use a lot. The first one that I have is a Canon 15 to 45 millimeter. This is the EFM mount, the kit lens that goes with the Canon M50. And I bought this because I enjoy making vlogs, and this lens is really great for that. It has image stabilization. The 15 millimeters is just a great focal range for vlogging. When you're holding out your camera like this, if you have the old kit lens that was like at 18 to 55, that one you were still like really stretching to get the camera to look on you. This one makes that 18 to 15 millimeter difference is huge with this lens. And really this lens is sharpest at the 15 millimeter range, which makes it just a great lens for that purpose. Unfortunately, the moment you start zooming in and get up towards like the 45 millimeter range, this lens gets super soft though, and I don't think it's usable. I've the more I've used it, I've been like, why am I even bothering shooting at that? The image just looks way too soft and not sharp. One other drawback to this lens is it has a variable aperture, so it's f3.5 to f6.3, and it's always a bummer when you zoom in and your image gets darker, and you really, like all of us video and photographers, we're always craving light. So when your lens aperture tightens up, especially in video, it's just kind of it's a bummer, and you then have to crank up your ISO or play with your shutter speed, which is not generally what I want to do. This is a great lens for vlogging, and the 15 millimeters is really good. And it's also lightweight and compact. It doesn't weigh much. So it's got some really good things going for it, but it also has some drawbacks. The next lens is the Sigma 24 to 70 millimeter. This one is a sort of newer one that I've been using, but it's a great one. It's probably the highest quality lens that I have been using lately. And just the weight of this lens in and of itself it's solid. It's pretty heavy, and that really lends itself to handheld footage. Just more weight steadies your hand. You get less of those micro jitters. The lens does have image stabilization, so you just pair those two things together. That's really helpful. It also has a fixed aperture of f2.8, which is like that's one of the shining moments of this lens. And you can zoom in from 24 millimeters to 70 millimeters, so it's got like a good zoom range. One drawback that I've noticed with this, since it's a Sigma lens and pairing it with the Canon bodies, I don't know if this is just like a third-party lens thing, but it does have autofocus, but the autofocus doesn't seem to work really well when you're using the face detect feature with the Canon camera bodies, at least these two cameras. I don't really know why, but it can be it doesn't always lock onto your face every single time. It can be inconsistent, which doesn't make it the most reliable. It does work well though with photos. I've seen, like, when I take photos, the autofocus seems to be pretty snappy, and I'm usually happy with it. This lens also is very sharp. That's one of the benefits of this thing, is it's much sharper than the Canon kit lens that I was just talking about. You get really crisp images, especially photos. This thing looks great. One last thing I'll mention about this though, that I'm not crazy about, is I do like the 24 to 70 millimeter like focal range that you get with this. However, when I hit 70 millimeters, I feel like I'm always wishing I could just go a little bit further, like up towards 100 millimeters. I don't know why, but it's nice, and I like this lens a lot, but I just sometimes wish it could go further. Now, the next lens I wanted to talk about is the Canon 18 to 135 millimeter. Overall, this is a really good running gun lens. It's not the sharpest, but you can't go wrong with the 18 millimeters all the way to 135. Like, that's a full spread of focal ranges that you could possibly need. That's one of the things I like about it the most. It does have autofocus, manual focus. You've got image stabilization, so that is also really useful. The one biggest downside to this lens is, again, the variable aperture. This one you get at f3.5 to f5.6, which, if you're in like a situation where you have plenty of light, it's not really a big deal. But if you are really craving light, like especially in dark situations, or if you're in a dark room, you can't do much with this lens other than cranking up your ISO, which again with these cameras is not something I love to do. So trade-off, but still a solid lens, one I've used tons of times, and I really like it. And the last lens I'll talk about is the Canon 50mm f1.8. Now this lens, I'd say, is just great for interviews, something where you have the camera sitting on a tripod. This camera doesn't have image stabilization, so that's a drawback, but it's really sharp because since it's not a zoom lens, it's a prime lens, there's less glass in here, so you get just a sharper image overall. I've really been happy with this. The autofocus works really good with this camera, and it is great with the f1.8. You just get a lot of light in this lens, and you can even pair this with the speed booster that I was talking about earlier. You put that on the Canon M50, you can get all the way down to f1.2, which is like, come on, that's awesome. So really like this lens, love the sharpness of it. The major downside for me is that it doesn't have image stabilization. And so if I'm ever trying to do handheld, I would not be using this lens because I just don't have steady hands. This camera, like, you get all those little jitters that we don't want in video. It doesn't look good, and it's just kind of like makes you nauseous when you're looking at it. So now that I've got all that out of the way, my dilemma feels like a choice between 3 or 4 options. One, I could try upgrading to a new camera body, something that shoots 4K, maybe has a full frame sensor. I feel like that would probably help to some degree in low light situations. And 2, I could upgrade to a new lens, something with at least an f2.8 aperture. Ideally, I'd love to have something that could zoom from wide to tight and maintain that aperture. I have had my eye on like a 70 to 200 millimeter. I feel like that's just a sharp lens. I know Canon has that and it's a good one, but again, lenses are expensive. So that's one option. Number 3 would be maybe a little bit of both. Don't go to like the next latest, greatest camera, but something a tick up from the Canon M50 or Canon 70D. I don't know, maybe that would be like the Canon 90D. Not sure yet, but you could do a little bit of a camera body upgrade and then maybe get a slightly nicer lens, something that is not the highest quality, but gets you up there a little bit. I don't know. It's hard to decide. Or 4, I could just do no upgrades, only upgrading myself in terms of my ability to light different situations, working on composition, cinematography, all that. Just work on those things and keep working with the camera gear that I currently have and just keep going that way. And I don't hate the sound of that. I really do want to use my camera and my lenses to their fullest potential. I've really enjoyed both of these cameras and all of these lenses, and I would hate to just go buy something new just for the sake of getting something new and shiny. Like, I want to squeeze every ounce of value out of both of these cameras and all of these lenses and feel like this equipment is holding me back before I go get something new. It doesn't make sense to just advance your equipment but not really know how to be using it, if you know what I mean. It's like, is it a me issue or an equipment issue? Hard to say, and that's where the dilemma is. So if you have any interest in this topic, or if you've been in this scenario before where you're just trying to decide if it's time to upgrade or not, I would really appreciate any advice or feedback or just other things to consider. So please, if you're watching this, comment below. Just give me a few pointers, or a few other things and tips would be really helpful, and I appreciate it. Obviously, I know your budget is a huge factor in this situation, so if you have a certain amount of cash that you can spend, that's going to determine what you want to upgrade and where you want to make your investments. So I get that, but yeah, any advice if you've been in this situation, please comment below. I'd really appreciate any help in this. Anyway, thanks for hanging out and watching this video. If you liked it or you found it helpful in some way, please hit the like button, subscribe to my channel, and keep your eye out for some of my upcoming videos, and I'll see you around.